Bills Mafia, welcome to Buffalo Late Night. Tonight we are talking about the Bills, about the Dolphins, about the battle for first place. Let's get it. Sam, what's going on, man?
Oh, it is. I agree with you, Thomas. It is the best time of year. Happy football. It is Thursday. There is football going on here tonight. And of course, I say, the biggest game of the NFL season coming up this weekend. Of course, I'm talking about my Miami Dolphins, your Buffalo Bills, week 4, battle for first place in Western New York. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the beginning of the season obviously started off a little rocky for the Buffalo Bills, and they've cleaned things up and kind of gotten back to where the expectations were heading into the season. This is a matchup that I think a lot of people they somewhat circled. Obviously, it's a big time AFC opponent, and one a lot of people think that Dolphins were on the rise last year, but I don't think anybody really knew what the Dolphins were heading into the season. There was questions on Tua and his health. There's questions on the roster. We didn't know if Mike McDaniel was, I don't want to say a flash in the pan, but we didn't know what he was going to do in his second year. All the critics are now shut up, including myself. There is a lot of naysayers that have kind of had to eat crow and sign their apology letters. So obviously we will get deep into that tonight, but big time matchup. And I think a lot of people are excited, but let's do this, Sam. Let's get right into it. Let's talk about these Miami Dolphins. What have you seen out of these guys out of the first 3 weeks? What has been your kind of blanket overview of the Miami Dolphins this year?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I said after the last game against the Denver Broncos, when you put up 70 points, it's not a good place to be in when you are paid and expected to talk about a professional football team and you're just out of words and you have nothing else to talk about. That's not a good place to be when you're a podcast host and doing radio, right? But it has been quite the turnaround. And quite frankly, I mean, the offense is what everybody's talking about, and rightfully so. But I don't know if people are giving enough credit to just how balanced and how deep and how wide the offensive weaponry is for the Miami Dolphins right now. I mean, it's just absolutely stupid. They can throw the ball, they can pass the ball, they can run with the ball. It's really, really difficult to find any holes in their offensive game right now. And I think that's the biggest difference from last year to this year. I mean, we had Tyreek Hill last year. We had Jalen Waddle last year. We had Raheem Mostert last year. And of course, Tua. But last year it was almost exclusively throwing the ball, mainly to two people. And this year it has evolved into a full-blown every man is contributing offense. And I think that is the scariest thing, is to see now that they have a full complement of weapons that are being utilized in an offensive line, which is playing much better. The sky is quite literally the limit. I mean, 70 points, and they throttled back in the fourth quarter.
I did it to myself on my own show. That's fantastic. Yeah, I'll tell you, that's been the big thing. Obviously, with Devon Achane, we all figured it out, and now we've lost it again. You got a new little gadget guy. Obviously, he's been kind of slowly. He was a healthy scratch week 1, and they kind of added a little bit in, and then this past week is just, doors are blown off.
Yeah.
It's just been wild to see what this Dolphins team has become, and now you guys get Jalen Waddle back this week, ideally off the concussion protocol. Obviously, last week, nearly record-setting performance, Mr. Humble Mike McDaniel, as people like to call him.
You didn't want to rub it in.
Right. I'm not sure I'm fully on the boat of the humbleness, but I understand the prospect of it all. It was a damn near record-setting performance against the very lowly Denver Broncos. I think everybody can kind of ascertain. Nobody really knows what this team is, but what are your thoughts on that game? Obviously, big-time performance, 70 points. I mean, beating a team by 50 is just ridiculous in and of itself, but to put up 70, what do you think, and how do you think the Dolphins were, and basically now kind of putting the league on notice?
Yeah, and I think it was a statement game. I mean, to your point, I think Mike McDaniel plays the NFL media, the players, fellow coaches. He plays them like a fiddle. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he knew exactly what he was doing, especially keep in mind, people forget this nugget. A couple of years ago, the Miami Dolphins were caught tampering with Mr. Tom Brady on a boat. And part of that plan, the rumored plan, was that Sean Payton was going to come along with him and come to the Miami Dolphins and coach for Stephen Ross. And last year, Sean Payton, who was not coaching at the time, took some shots at Tua Tagovailoa and actually predicted that based on performance, Tua Tagovailoa was his prediction as somebody who would be benched, and he was stumping for Teddy Bridgewater, somebody who he had coached as a quarterback before. This is not lost on Mike McDaniel. He is not a stupid guy. In fact, he's quite the opposite, as most people will tell you. He went to Yale. Did you know he went to Yale? It's kind of like, did you know Ryan Tannehill played wide receiver in college? He's a smart guy, and this was a statement, and it was a statement to Sean Payton, and it was a statement to everyone. Also, keep in mind, he was the ball boy for the Denver Broncos. There's a lot of underlying motivations here. Vic Fangio, former head coach of the Denver Broncos, now the defensive coordinator for the Miami Dolphins. I don't care what anybody says. They will never admit to it, but this was a statement game. They wanted to tell everybody, look at us, and if you're going to talk bad about us, we're going to note it, and we're going to hand you your receipts at the appropriate time. That's exactly what this game was this past weekend. Now, I don't think they predicted 70, but if it's there, you got to take it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a game that I think, and I wholeheartly agree. I think there was a lot, I don't know, it's underlying animosity, but you could definitely tell in football, even though it may not be vocalized, there's kind of that silent, murmur where there's a lot of, men being men trying to, jostle for position. And I think that's what it's really come down to for the Dolphins. A lot of people, especially Tua, and I think that's something that needs to be talked about. Tua, from Brian Flores days, was benched multiple times. He was benched for Ryan Fitzpatrick. Benched basically at every possible turn. They didn't believe in him. And not to say that it happened, but last year there was, with all the injuries and everything kind of happening with him, he needs to prove himself. He wants a contract. So I agree with you wholeheartedly that I think a lot of what happened last week was maybe it was just everything coming to a head, and they said, you know what, let's do this thing. And they didn't have any mercy. And I do understand, a lot of people come out and say, kind of looks bad on the league, and it's a bad image to run the score up on another NFL team. But in my sentiment, it's also the onus of the Broncos to stop them. And the fact that they couldn't stop a team from scoring 70 is that's a cause for concern about how bad Mr. Sean Payton, who said the Broncos were poorly coached, were now basically ineffective on defense. So I think it's an interesting situation that happened last week. But in regards to that, into that matchup, there's a lot of intriguing things that happened. You saw a lot more motion. I mean, they've kind of, if you look at a lot of the games last year, and us at Cover One, we've been kind of looking at a lot of the stuff and trying to figure out within our own team how you beat them. How do you beat the Dolphins? How do you beat the motion? How do you cover an uncoverable Tyreek Hill? And you saw a lot of what the offense was last in against the Broncos. What do you think is, I guess, how are they beating everybody? Like, I guess I don't know how to put this in the words, but like, how are they creating this offense, this, I guess, newfangled design where they're basically keeping everybody guessing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen how roller coasters are created, but it's basically like this piece of wire, and the creative minds that come up with roller coasters just kind of twist and torque it into whatever it needs to be. And then they go, yeah, that looks good. That looks like that could be a thrill ride. And then they create it, right? You get structural engineers and people to actually create that. It feels like in many ways, Mike McDaniel just sits there with clay and molding, play after play, and just putting it out there and goes, that doesn't seem like it violates any offensive, penalties or anything like that. Sure, let's go ahead and do that. Now, I see people in the chat saying it's like the Wildcat was in 2008. I disagree. Wildcat was an absolute gimmick. It caught everybody by surprise. And then all of a sudden you were able to coach against it. Go ahead and try to coach against this offense and see what they do. New England Patriots try to do that with 3 safeties deep in week 2. And you know what they did? They ran the ball down their throats, and they just throw it to everybody who's 5, 6, 7 yards in the middle of the field. And then guess what? You have all that speed on display. All you need to do is make one defender miss, and you got wide open real estate again. So this is a much more complex and harder offense to defend. So I will disagree with that. I will say when it comes to the Wildcat, this past game, and I don't want to keep talking about Denver, was the first time since the Wildcat game that I was speechless, like I talked about, where I went, what did I just witness? What did I just see? This is something completely different. But yeah, I mean, I look at this and go, I don't know how you're going to necessarily defend it, because it keeps evolving every week based on what the defense is showing. And they're so versatile. And the thing about Tua, now, people can knock his arm strength, and I think Mike McDaniel has the best answer to that. I don't need a guy who can throw it 80 yards if, 40 yards to the end zone. What does that matter if he throws it 80? If he can get it 40 yards and I can let somebody else run, go for it. Tua does 2 things very, very well. He does a lot of things very well, but 2 things that are elite in my opinion. He has one of the quickest processors in terms of a quarterback's brain that I have seen in a very long time. He is thinking and understanding what is happening pre-snap and also during the snap. He knows exactly where everything is supposed to be and what he's supposed to do with the ball. And he goes through his progressions and his reads very, very quickly. Number 2, he's accurate as all get out. Now, it might take a little bit longer than a Josh Allen to throw the ball to a spot, but it's going to be in that spot. And I'll take my first knock at Josh Allen. He'll do that same thing and knock out a kid in the 3rd row because he throws it far too past the wide receiver or whoever else. So his accuracy and his processing, understanding this offense, which is very complex, is why he's the perfect person to run this for Mike McDaniel. You are looking at essentially a revolutionary version of Eric Coryell and the West Coast offense kind of combining together. And the defense will catch up. I mean, Buffalo's a fantastic defense, so we'll see what everybody's made of this Sunday. But it is, in my opinion, sustainable, and they'll continue to find new wrinkles and new avenues, very much like the San Francisco 49ers when they needed a runner. So they didn't go to a running back. They went to Deebo Samuel and said, we can make this work. It's just they're going to find new wrinkles every single week. And that's why it's fun, if you're following the Miami Dolphins or a fan of them, to watch this team win, lose, or otherwise.
Now, obviously, the big thing that's made the Dolphins quite deadly this year, Mostert and Achane, or Achane, those 2 together, what are they?
When you score 4 touchdowns, you're allowed to, we have to call you whatever it is that you want to be called. But it was right. Achane. It's spelled Achane. It's cooler as Achane, but he says it's Achane, so it's Achane.
Yeah, well, let's go with whatever. Next year, maybe he'll change it to something else. But between them, it's still, I couldn't believe it. And I have Mostert on my fantasy team. When I looked and saw that he had 4 touchdowns, but then Devin had also 4 touchdowns, which whatever. I mean, that's just insanity to me. That doesn't make any sense in any realm of reality in football. But the biggest thing I think about, when it comes to Mike McDaniel is he kind of got away from the run. Like he gets a little uneasy about utilizing the run, or he kind of leaned too hard into the pass. Whereas this year, it seems that he's kind of getting more to a balanced offense, which for the Bills, and we'll talk about that in a second, is very similar. Do you think McDaniel can, and I always kind of think of him as a little kid, the guy's so young looking. Do you think he can continue on this path and kind of keep himself in check for what works really well? Because obviously we're seeing that him balancing the pass with a very effective run has made the Dolphins a very, very difficult offense to put, even scheme against.
Yeah, no, I do. And I do think that is part of this evolution of his offense, is being able to check himself and say, what can I do better? I mean, he's like a constant AI ball, just in human form, and that he's constantly trying to get himself better and learn from his own mistakes. I mean, one of the things that you've seen less of this year that you saw last year were pre-snap penalties. We're not seeing delay of games. We're not seeing false starts. We're not seeing these, mental mistakes that were happening last year as a rookie head coach. And he even said, look, I took a long time to get plays to the quarterback, which of course delays everything else. And that's when you start seeing these pre-snap type penalties. That's not happening. They're getting to the line faster. They're getting the play call in faster. He's trusting Tua if he needs to audible out to do that. And those things start to go away. It's an evolution of a coach getting better at his game. He apologized to the running back room this offseason and said exactly what you just talked about. We didn't run the ball enough. In fact, I just looked it up. For the first 3 games last season, which included the Buffalo Bills in week 3, the Miami Dolphins ran the ball 36% of their offensive plays. This year through 3 games, it's at 47%. So roughly half. They are balanced. And it's not just that they're running the ball more, they're having success in doing it. I mean, they're number 1 in the league in running. They're number 1 in the league in passing. And that's what I mean. It's so hard and so difficult to know how to defend this offense right now, because they're so dynamic and they have so many weapons, and they just keep popping up with new ones every single week. You're like, oh, that guy plays for them now? Wonderful. I didn't even know that guy was on the team, including Robbie Chosen, who was called up from the practice squad and gets himself a 68-yard touchdown pass, which maybe was a little bit egregious in the fourth quarter as you bench all your starters. But, I digress. It's one of those things where we'll see when it stops, right? Like if all of a sudden we go from 6.7 yards per carry down to 3.5, is he going to abandon and say, you know what, this isn't working. I've got Tyreek Hill. I've got Jalen Waddle. I'm going to go throw the ball 60 times. Don't know. We also aren't seeing the Miami Dolphins play from behind quite yet. I mean, there was a lot of lead changes in week 1 against the Los Angeles Chargers, but it never got out of hand where you're having to, play for points and pick up big chunks of yards at any given point. They weren't playing desperate, I guess is where I'm going with that. So if they keep games close, I think he's going to stay the course when it comes to running the ball and being disciplined. If they start to see it go away, you see 2 scores or 17 points, all of a sudden, maybe they chase a little bit because they have to out of necessity. But so far, evidence so far this season is that he is running the ball and having success in doing so.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the big point of this game coming forward is obviously, like you said, and really for the Bills as well, neither team has faced a prolific offense. I mean, they, obviously Dolphins played the Chargers, but outside of that, it's just been kind of ho-hum, right? Obviously we know what the Patriots are, and then for the Bills, obviously Jets, Raiders, or who knows what, and then last week it was just the Commanders couldn't do anything. I think the big thing this week is going to be who gets out and who gets out fast. Mm-hmm. And to your point, with their offense, I think the Bills can get McDaniel kind of off of his game where they're not going to be able to utilize the run and that they have to start, kind of passing. That's important. And I think it works the same way for the Bills as well. The Dolphins absolutely want to get Josh Allen into Sugar Rush Josh. They want to get Josh to week 1 Josh, not week 3 Josh, because they want him to make as many possible mistakes. Now, I think the one thing, and I was mentioning this a bit ago, is with the balanced offense, that's what you're seeing this year with the Buffalo Bills.
Sure.
You're seeing a very, very balanced offense with running, with passing. And now you've got James Cook, 267 yards. He's the number 2 running back in the NFL at 6.1 yards per carry. No touchdowns, but that's because Latavius Murray and Damian Harris, the 2 Thunderbacks, really the ones kind of carrying the load when you get into the red zone.
I call them vultures in fantasy football as a James Cook owner myself.
Bingo. Yeah, there you are. What are your thoughts about this Bills offense? Because obviously for the Dolphins, one of the key points is no Jalen Ramsey. That's big. But Xavier Howard seems to be having a renaissance. Javon Holland, one of the best young safeties in the NFL. And then a defensive line that probably will be without Jalen Phillips, but still has Christian Wilkins, still has Zach Sealer. A lot of very, very, very young talent. Yeah. And then a linebacking core that's very up and down, it seems. How do you think that the Dolphins defense is going to match up, but how are they going to prevent an offense who in back-to-back weeks have put up 37 and 38 points respectively?
Yeah. Now, part of the problem with putting up 70 points in a game is that your defense tends to be overshadowed. Now, the Denver Broncos scored 20 in that game, but 7 of those came on a kick return where nobody seemed interested in doing anything other than watching Marvin Mims Jr. run 95 yards to the touch. And we were like, we'll just take the ball back and score again. Like, go ahead and get your 1 touchdown, and we'll just, cross that out on the very next play ourselves. They gave up 13 points to the Denver Broncos, who going into that game were the actual NFL leaders in points per possession. It wasn't the Dolphins, it wasn't the Bills, it wasn't the Chiefs, it wasn't the 49ers. It was the Denver Broncos. The Russell Wilson-led Denver Broncos were scoring more points per possession than any other team in the NFL until they went up against this Miami Dolphins defense, who gave up 13. They gave up 17 to the New England Patriots. They gave up a lot to the Los Angeles Chargers, but the Los Angeles Chargers are a very good offense, and we're running a year 1 scheme of Vic Fangio with not even having all the right pieces. This defense next year at this time is going to be scary. Mark my words on that. But you're right. If Jalen Phillips doesn't play in this game, then you're going to see Andrew Van Ginkel, who I call him the Forrest Gump of football. This guy's around every single big play for the Miami Dolphins. He's just in the background, kind of like Forrest Gump was in that movie. He'll probably slide to the outside, very similar to what you saw in that New England Patriots game. He can play inside, he can play outside. He's a very fundamentally sound player who was recruited back to the Miami Dolphins by Vic Fangio once we hired him. And if Vic Fangio is looking at you saying, I need you in my linebacking core, that means he's going to use you. So I do expect Andrew Van Ginkel to be on the outside. I expect Christian Wilkins to say hello to his best friend, Josh Allen, a couple times. They seem to get in each other's face, and cause some chippiness. That's going to happen in this game. I'm going to say over under 3.5 times, you're going to see a little bit of a scrum pushing, all that fun stuff. But that's what they're going to have to do. It's going to have to be Christian Wilkins. It's going to have to be Zach Sealer. It's going to have to be Raekwon Davis, who has been fantastic in the middle this year for the Miami Dolphins against the run. And they're going to have to take it personally. They're going to have to beat the Buffalo Bills linemen to the point and, suck up double teams. And then their linebackers, who it really is the weak point of the Miami Dolphins, and David Long Jr. and Jerome Baker. They're going to have to shoot the gaps and stop James Cook, who is probably going to be motivated to run against his favorite team growing up, the Miami Dolphins. That tends to happen to the Miami Dolphins as well. I was talking to Pierre Garçon, former wide receiver, and he says, every time I played Miami, I was motivated because he grew up in that area. But that's what they're going to have to do. They're just going to have to play fundamentally sound football inside in the trenches and gobble up those offensive linemen, not let them get out to the second level. And then, of course, your defensive backs, if you try to bounce it outside, they're going to have to do something more than a Deion Sanders impression when it comes to tackling. They're going to have to be much more sound on the outside. That's where not having Jalen Ramsey is really an issue, because he is a good tackler from the cornerback position. Xavier Howard is not. And then you said Javon Holland is an up-and-coming safety. He's actually the top-ranked safety in the NFL. So, yeah, I think he's there. He's arrived. But Deshaun Elliott on the other side isn't the run-stopping safety that you want necessarily. So that balance for the Buffalo Bills, which I maintain they didn't have that third option consistently last year. You had Stephon Diggs, who's very good, and Josh Allen, who was kind of his own option. Now that you throw James Cook into there, that's a balanced team that has good complementary players like a Gabe Davis. I'm imagining Trent Sherfield will somehow come alive to go up against his former team this week as well. It's going to be an interesting matchup. I think the Buffalo Bills' strength as a defense against the Miami Dolphins offense is what people are going to be looking at. But the game's going to be won or lost based on what you just talked about. Does Josh Allen make mistakes? And can the Miami Dolphins stop that element of the run game that the Buffalo Bills have this year that they didn't necessarily have consistently last year? And if not, then it's going to be a long day for the Miami Dolphins in Western New York again.
Now, based on what you've seen so far for the Finns, what are your feelings heading into Sunday's big time matchup? What are you feeling about them as a team coming out on top, and what is their way to getting that W?
Yeah, I mean, the Miami Dolphins have not won in Buffalo since Christmas Eve of 2016. And even then, it took an overtime field goal from a guy named Andrew Franks, who I'm pretty sure I just passed on the freeway 35 minutes ago coming into the studio. It's been a long time since the Miami Dolphins have won in Buffalo. Now, we beat Buffalo in Miami last year. And of course, I know Buffalo fans are still furious at the Sun for making an appearance. But these are two evenly matched teams. We lost in December in Buffalo in the snow, but it was a very close game. And then the playoff game, of course, Buffalo wins. But you do it with a third-string quarterback for the Miami Dolphins. You do it with a lot of injuries for the Miami Dolphins. It was a pretty close game heading into the fourth quarter there. So I think these two teams are evenly matched. This is basically Batman and Joker, Superman and Lex Luthor. These are the two good guys or bad guys, depending on which side of the fence you are on, doing battle yet again. And I think if the Miami Dolphins can keep it to a one-score game, either up or down, you're going to see them run the ball, and you're going to see them try to keep Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs and James Cook on the sidelines as much as they possibly can with a little bit more ball control than you saw against the Denver Broncos. I mean, at some point, the Denver Broncos, like you said, they just weren't tackling. So we were just turning around and handing the ball to our fifth string running back, and he's going for 58 yards, and they're just not tackling him. Like, I guess I got to run. I think that's the key for the Miami Dolphins. This is not going to be a blowout. This will not be a 70-20 victory for the Miami Dolphins. If they're lucky in terms of a score separation, it's because they got something late. They got an interception. They got a fumble return, possibly a special teams play, something like that. That is the separation. And I think that's really going to be the key. Who makes the critical mistake and at what point in the game? Is it Josh Allen throwing an interception when he shouldn't be in the red zone? Is it Tua Tagovailoa fumbling another snap? It's going to come down to some sort of turnover that leads to a big play for the other team. That's how I see this game playing out.
Now, based on that, obviously we know Tua, we know Tyreek, we know Mostert. Who should the Bills fans be keeping their eye on in terms of the Miami Dolphins? What's a name or a player that could be the key to the victory for them?
Yeah, well, I'll give you the names on offense. I mean, there's the typical ones, right? You've got Tyreek Hill, you've got Jalen Waddle. I would say Jalen Waddle is due. He missed last week. I think if it was a playoff game, he would have magically been through that fifth level of concussion protocol. But, it was the Denver Broncos, and we're like, we'd rather have you week 4 against Buffalo. Look for Jalen Waddle to get on the scoreboard. He does not have a touchdown so far this season. Everyone's going to be hyper-focused on Tyreek Hill, and rightfully so. Just don't do what the Broncos did and double Robbie Chosen and let Tyreek Hill go wide open. That's a bad recipe if you're cooking on defense. So I'd look for Jalen Waddle to be targeted early. Raheem Mostert is always going to be a guy that you have to look out for. But I'll give you 2 names that you might not consider right off the bat. Number 1. We have a fullback. He's the highest paid fullback in the league named Alec Ingold. He's basically in there to block and crack heads for the tailbacks behind him, but he can catch the ball out of the backfield, and he is basically a safety valve for Tua Tagovailoa. So if he does start to see pressure come his way, he will float that ball out to the tailback. He will float it out to the fullback, and they will run plays for Alec Ingold. And all of a sudden you'll look up at the end of the game and go, Alec Ingold, who I've never heard of, had 4 catches for 58 yards and a touchdown. What just happened? So look out for the fullback for the Miami Dolphins. And then the other one is our little gadget guy, Braxton Berrios. He's another one who he does pirouettes and cartwheels and everything else and gets himself open. And he's kind of like Chris Carter, who all he does is catch touchdowns. All Braxton Berrios does is catch first downs. It could be 3rd and 19, and he's going to get 20 yards, even if he catches the ball 2 yards from the line of scrimmage. So those are the 2 that I would, if you're going to go deep into that roster, because you guys are already aware of Mostert. You're aware of Achane. You're aware of Waddle, and you're aware of Tyreek, and of course Tua Tagovailoa. Alec Ingold, fullback, and 3rd wide receiver Braxton Berrios.
Now, based on that, and let's get your non-biased opinion in this, as a Dolphins content creator, knowing the Dolphins as well as you do, what is your pathway for the Buffalo Bills to win on Sunday against a very, very vaunted Miami Dolphins team?
Yeah, so the Buffalo Bills are no joke. I mean, I'm not going to sit here now. I look, I know people are watching this, and this is all Buffalo people. Full disclosure: the Buffalo Bills are the team I hate the most in the NFL. I grew up watching Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, freaking James Lofton, Daryl Talley, Bruce Smith, Cornelius Bennett, Kent Hull, the center, Pete Metzelaars. Did I mention James Lofton? Andre Reed, there's another one. I can go into two hands of the guys that broke my heart every single season, including AFC Championship games. So I am motivated for the Miami Dolphins to beat the Buffalo Bills just as a fan. But I'm also not dumb. I know that the Buffalo Bills are good. They're well coached. They're a very solid football team. They are the Philadelphia Eagles of the AFC. There's not a hole in their game. They've got good defense. They've got good offense. They have a couple of great players in Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. And they're a little bit top heavy there, but their bottom is way up here. I mean, their worst player would be the best player on somebody else's team, if that makes any sense. So to me, if the Buffalo Bills are able to mitigate the run game with Raheem Mostert, Devin Achan, all four of them, then they're going to make the Miami Dolphins one-dimensional. And if that's the case, then I think you can actually start to try to bring pressure. You can get a little bit more creative with your coverage schemes and try to, knock Tua off of his timing routes, get Tyreek or Jalen Waddle, covered when they don't look like they're covered, and all of a sudden Tua's thrown to spots where they aren't. That would be the pathway. And having a mistake, jumping on the opportunities. Look, Connor Williams is going to play in this game, which is a big benefit for the Miami Dolphins. He's their center, and he is a great asset when it comes to blocking. The snap between him and Tua Tagovailoa has been a problem all season long. Not just in shotgun where he's throwing it high and throwing it low, but the actual exchange between the two men who have physical contact between their hands and the butt. They can't seem to figure out how to get the ball into that little area right there. So if I'm the Buffalo Bills, I'm watching that exchange like a hawk, and I'm diving on that ball because the Miami Dolphins have already let 2 drives in the red zone go, which would have been touchdowns most likely, because they couldn't hang on to the ball. In fact, when they went to kneel down against New England Patriots, they fumbled that snap and almost gave the ball back to the Patriots in Dolphins territory. So the Dolphins have to clean that up. But if they don't, the Buffalo Bills need to jump on that opportunity, and then they need to capitalize on it. They can't give the ball back. They need to score on those extra possessions if and when those occur. But to me, the Buffalo Bills have a great defense. They have a pretty good, if not great, offense. If they can play their game plan and shut down the Miami Dolphins run game, again, it's going to be a tough day for the Miami Dolphins.
And finally, let's go ahead. What is your prediction going into this Sunday's game?
75-15 Miami. No. Look, this is a tough one for me because I see this being a close game. I expect this to be somewhat of a nail biter. I'm pretty sure I'm going to wear a hole in my hardwood floors watching this thing as I pace back and forth, yelling after every single play. But I don't know if it's going to be like 37-34 or if it's going to be 17-14, because I think it's going to be a physical game. I think it's going to be something where when we all watch this on Sunday, we're going to feel like we were in the game just watching it. It's going to be that level of intense. It's going to be a little mini playoff game. I can't bet against the Miami Dolphins because right now it's really hard to see how anybody's going to defend, this offense. But I don't think it's a blowout. I don't think it's something where one is going to definitively be better than the other, where we walk out of here going, they're better than this team. I think it's going to be, yeah, they won, but. Right? It's going to be one of those things. So it's going to come down to who makes the mistakes and who can capitalize on them. I'm going to be a homer. I'm just going to tell everybody right now, I apologize, but I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. I'm going to go Miami Dolphins. Let's go Miami Dolphins 31. We're going to do a 30 burger, 31-28. Let's just go ahead and give it a 3-point spread between the Miami Dolphins and the second place Buffalo Bills.
Well, that'll be definitely a very unfortunate loss. My wife and I will be there. So that'd be awful. Hopefully I will already be home at that point if I don't even want to think about that. But needless to say, Sam, truly appreciate you spending some time with us tonight. Why don't you let people know where they can find you if there is Dolphins fans watching, or if not, if they just want to get some more content before Sunday's game, how can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me if you want to find me on X or Twitter or whatever it's called this week at Perfectville Pod. We're pretty active on that during game day as well. Myself and my co-host just released the game preview for week 4. We call it We Hate the Buffalo Bills, and we'll tell you all the top 3 reasons why we hate the Buffalo Bills, and we'll do it in game preview form. We also have a drinking bingo game. So if certain things happen during the broadcast, you go ahead and scratch it off on your bingo card, which you can find on our Twitter feed. Things like, as an example, if they happen to show Marv Levy and Don Shula embracing in those snow parkas, from the 1990s. If they show that graphic on the screen, you take a shot. Things like that. So we like to have fun during the game, and you can find all that on Twitter/X at Perfectville Pod. You can find the podcast anywhere podcasts are, but we are part of the BLEAV network. So if you want to go to BLEAV.com and type in Perfectville or Miami Dolphins or I Hate Sam or whatever it is you want to do, you can probably find our show right then and there. And we're out every single week, and we talk about all things. I mean, how could we go this entire show and not talk about Travis and Taylor? But we'll talk about anything, all things football related.
For sure. Well, Sam, we do appreciate it. Maybe we'll have to link up right before the Week 18 matchup. But again, definitely appreciate your time, and Sunday should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I will be at that Week 18 matchup, TBD, as it says there. So we don't know what time yet, but same as you. I'm hoping it'll be a good time for me and a bad time for you. But thank you for having me. I feel a little bit dirty being behind enemy lines here, but I appreciate you being a fantastic host. And for all the Bills fans out there, I hope you get splinters when you go through the table.
Well, my studio is tainted, so we'll see you. And thanks again, as always, brother. Take care.
See ya.
Guys, that was Sam Marcoux of BLEAV Perfectville Podcast. Fantastic stuff right there. If you didn't catch the whole thing, obviously, after the show, you can rewatch this and catch all the content. Really good insight. Really kind of filled in the gaps as to what people need to expect or what kind of situations we might run into as Bills fans. But it's a big time matchup. I mean, let's call it like it is. This is a matchup that I think a lot of people, like I said before, kind of circled but didn't really pay attention to. Now we know the Dolphins are for real. They are a team that I think a lot of people really have to pause and think about. But before we do that, what I want to get right into, guys, is with the Cover One Pass, all this content that you're seeing going on right now, the best way to support us here at Cover One is the Cover One Pass. So we'll give Greg and Aaron their chance to explain.
Many people ask us the best way to support us here at Cover One, and that is to sign up to become a Cover One Pass member. That contribution helps give us the access to all the data and information we use to create the content that you love.
And I think most importantly, brings you into our community of insiders. It's a great community based on Slack. I know a lot of people don't want to be on social media anymore or be in on those conversations. We bring all of it to you right in our great community of educated fans. And most importantly, you get access to our content creators.
Even better than that, everybody loves merch. You get awesome t-shirts, a cool decal, and a letter from the Cover One team signed directly to you.
All for $60. That gets you the entire season, next year's free agency and draft. $60. Click the link in the description. Cover One Insider. Become one today.
You heard it right there, guys. That was Aaron. That was Greg. Become a Cover One Insider. Sign up for the Cover One Pass. It is fantastic. We have a great community. The Slack channel is fantastic. Definitely get right in on that. But I will say this, like I'd said before, this matchup's big. And I think the big thing we got to talk about is going into this week, obviously we're 2-1. Dolphins are 3-0. This is big time for the AFC East. But even more so, you have to think, if the Dolphins and if Tua is able to stay healthy, you're talking they are a dominant team. And if you look at both of our schedules, they're very, very similar. Obviously, the Bills have a first place schedule over the Dolphins there, so they're going to have a little bit tougher opponents. But the Bills' schedule is not that hard, and quite frankly, Dolphins isn't that hard either. So these are the type of games out of the gate that you want to put yourself in the best possible position. And we saw last week, obviously, we saw what Josh Allen was able to do against the Washington Commanders. It's very imperative that Josh stays within himself. We saw what can happen when Josh gets kind of out of pocket and starts playing a little wily. But then we've also seen what Josh can do when he's staying within kind of the confines of what the offense is, what Ken Dorsey wants him to do. And that's the biggest part of all this. We now know that we've got a great running game. You've got, James Cook, Latavius Murray, Damian Harris, the three of them who have been very, very effective, kind of interchanging. James Cook has been very effective outside the numbers, and once in a while up the gut, though I honestly am not really a fan of the 5 straight up the gut runs on 2nd and 10. Needless to say, the ability for them to kind of change of pace, which is I think what they wanted to do in the past when they had Zach Moss and Devin Singletary. Now we have that ability. You have guys that like James Cook who can break a 60-yard run, or Damian Harris and Latavius Murray who can lower their shoulder. And that allows Josh to kind of play the offensive structure that he, I think, thrives in and can really kind of get back to more of a comfort zone. Because if you look back to 2020, 2021, when we had Cole Beasley, that's when our offense was at its best, right? That's when Josh was MVP level, if Aaron Rodgers hadn't done even better. But you saw what Josh could do there, right? Like, you saw that Josh was prolific, but that was because it was death by 1,000 cuts. He was matriculating down the field in such a way that allowed the Bills to, whether it was dink and dunk or take little stabs, they didn't feel as though they had to get, basically massive chunk plays or explosive plays to be able to win the game. Now that you have this offense, unlike last year where we didn't have Jamison Crowder, where Isaiah McKenzie was ineffective, you couldn't have anybody over the middle because Dawson Knox was helping out Spencer Brown. Now you have Dalton Kincaid, which, watch out for this week. One thing I do want to mention, the Dolphins have been one of the worst teams, not just this year, but for many years in terms of defending against tight ends. Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox should have an instant impact in the game on Sunday. But the offense has the ability to be not only versatile, but multiple, right? This is an offense that no longer is going to get stifled because they just can't get out of their own way. And I think that's what happened last year a lot of times is you saw that the offense, I don't know if it was lacked creativity or vision or kind of explosiveness, but when Josh, unfortunately, after his first couple reads, everything was clogged up, he couldn't really do a whole lot. And maybe he would run out of pocket or, he'd get sacked or things just would kind of, unfortunately, the play would never develop. That doesn't happen this year because he has so many different safety valves. And normally when you talk about a safety valve for the Buffalo Bills, that would be whether it's James Cook out of the backfield or maybe a slot receiver like, Chris, why am I blanking? Dalton Kincaid or Trent Sherfield. You would have guys that can create either over the middle or out of the backfield. Now you have so many different methods to being able to get the ball to different guys. You can manufacture space. And that's a big part about this offense is being able to get them into space. I think they've been trying to do that with Deontay Hardy, but this offense just needs to get into a rhythm. And I think that's what you're seeing. I think that's what you saw last week against Washington is that kind of Dable game plan where you kind of get Josh into a nice rhythm out of the gate, quick, easy passes, little dump offs, plays that he feels most comfortable. I think this will be an interesting game for him though, because if you're talking about a game, there's two schools of thought. Right. There's two schools of thought in this game, and either of them work. And I think either of them could potentially help the Bills win this. Right. Like, obviously, we saw what Sam said, the pathway for the Bills to victory. I think the two main methods here, which obviously they're antithesis of each other. One is what they've been doing. They chew up the clock. They matriculate down the field, death by 1,000 cuts. Like I said, they just Josh taking what defense gives. If he can keep passing down the field, and whether it's an 8-yard out or, it's a curl route or he's getting Gabe Davis to the sidelines or, Steph Diggs with a little comeback, whatever he needs to do to get the ball down the field, that'll work. And that's a great way of being able to tire out their defense and keep Tua and the offense off the field. But then there's the other alternative, which is potentially what might happen on Sunday. The Bills might have to go back to what they've done in the past. It might have to be, Josh, listen, you got to be Superman. You got to be superhero Josh, the guy that puts the entire team on your shoulders. He very well may have to do things that we told him not to do. If it gets to the point where Dolphins are scoring at will, the Bills just do not have an answer, Josh might have to, unfortunately, go back to that kind of guy where he's going to have to, kind of just let the ball fly and air it out. And fortunately, we do have weapons to be able to do that. I don't like the idea of that just because we know what can happen. If Josh gets a little kind of wily, he gets out of pocket, he gets to the point where he just wants to make something happen. We see sometimes where he puts the ball in harm's way. And a lot of that, I think, can be just broken down to Josh just trying to force it. And that's okay sometimes. I mean, one thing you guys have to remember with Josh Allen, and I know it's tough because I too am victim of this. You get mad because you don't want Josh to do that. But what Josh does that we get mad at is what makes Josh very, very good. That's what makes Josh effective and dangerous in the NFL is the fact that, one, he'll make throws that most people will not make, and he'll try things most people will not try. But there might be a pathway to victory this week that just might be what Josh has to do is he might have to force it. He might have to play hero ball, unfortunately, just because of the fact that it might be a gun show. It might be an air raid type of day where both teams are just scoring. And he might have to just keep up because you don't want to get to the point where one team's scoring and you're trying to matriculate and things don't go right. Now, obviously, the game plan is going to be indicative of how the Bills defense holds up. And that's a big key right here, right? That's something we do have to talk about is the Bills defense, what they're doing, how they're doing it. And I think the big part about what the Bills have done thus far is they've been effective. They've been effective at stopping a couple teams that, quite frankly, have just not been effective yet. And so I think there's a little bit here that we have to kind of take a step back at, right? Because people have been talking about the Bills and, or like I mentioned earlier about how the Dolphins have played teams that defensively are not very good. The same can be said for the Bills. The Bills really have not faced any prolific offenses. They've still done their job. You can only play who's in front of you, so that's obviously a big point of this. But if you look at who the Bills have, who they've played and what they've done, they've stayed in their lane. Right? They haven't tried to do too much, but they've made a concerted effort to clamp down. When you saw the Buffalo Bills play against Sam Howell and the Commanders, they did exactly what the other teams couldn't do, right? They said, listen, we're going to pressure you. We're going to get our hands up. We're going to open up lanes, make it look like you have an available throw, and then clamp down and close it. It's all window dressing, right? The tough part about that with the Miami Dolphins is Miami's offense is a timing-based offense. It's an offense where Tua knows where the wide receiver or tight end is or running back is going to be. So a lot of what the Bills are going to have to do is they're going to have to either, who knows, most often they've been playing is a zone-based defense. They don't really have the guys to play a man-based unless they're going to play Kyer Elam. They're going to have to play tight defense. And the other part about this, and Eric Turner was saying, we were kind of talking about this in our staff chat, is how you defend against Tyreek Hill and his motion. And that's going to be a big thing, right? That's going to be a big part of being able to stop this Miami defense because Tyreek, he does a couple different really good things. One, Tyreek does a lot of clear out routes. And what a clear out route basically is he just tries to drag a defender with him and allow it to basically open up space for another receiver, making a soft spot in that zone or an available area for a wide receiver to get open. That's what Tyreek does very, very well. Because of his speed and because of who he is and the prowess that he comes with, he drags people. He's going to garner a lot of attention. The other part about it is he's just damn fast. He's just a guy you can't defend. We've seen this. We've known Tyreek. This is not a guy we're unaccustomed to. We've played against Tyreek for 4 years, back when he was with Kansas City, now with Miami. We know how not only definitively fast he is, but he's also very elusive. And I know those two things are very similar, but Tyreek is not just fast, but he's quick. He's very quick in and out of his breaks. He's got incredible straight line speed, and he gets to where he needs to get to fast. But he's not the only one. Jalen Waddle's very fast. Raheem Mostert's very fast. Devon Achan's very fast. So it's going to be the Bills have to stay within themselves. They cannot get inside their own heads trying to do something that doesn't make sense for their defense, right? They have to do what they do best. And that's being very, very dedicated, staying in their gap. Gap integrity is going to be huge because, one, you're going to want to make sure that you're basically clamping down. You're not going to completely eliminate their run game. But if you can keep them from breaking off massive runs and not what Mostert did last year in the snow game against us, you don't want him to shred us. You don't want to get to the point where the Bills defenders all day long are on their heels. You don't want the defenders to feel like they're gassed because they're trying to keep up with these speed demons. If you can keep them under wraps to a degree, then you can focus on that air raid offense that, the Dolphins have. And I think that's going to be a big part about this. It's just understanding that you have to stay within yourselves. I did see Roy say something earlier, and I did want to check back on this. Do you trust Allen to stay level-headed if they fall behind? I don't know how long he can. So that's a big question. Obviously, it's something. Give me 1 second. Obviously, that is something that is a question mark, a big-time question mark, because we know Josh, whether it's Sugar Rush Josh or Hero Ball Josh Allen can be the guy that can both marvel you and frustrate you. Like we said this earlier, Josh Allen makes plays that very few quarterbacks or athletes in NFL history have ever been able to make. The guy is a freak of nature. He's an anomaly in and of himself. He's got a cannon of an arm, but he also makes plays because he tries very hard. He is the alpha male, ultra competitor. He's the guy that wants to be the best of the best, right? We know this. We know Josh. He was the same back when he was in Wyoming, and since he's been here, he's been that guy. So if you look at this, I think it comes down to Josh has to, if he gets behind, he needs to know that he can still win the game. And I think here's the big question for it, right? You've never seen Josh against the Dolphins make dumb mistakes. He's 27 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. And that's over the 10 games. So obviously that's not all Mike McDaniel. A lot of that's Brian Flores. He's had a litany of different games across his tenure against the Dolphins. But the one thing can be said, he's never had the game where he just kind of just collapses. That just doesn't happen against the Dolphins, which means, and I like, if you ever go on Twitter Spaces, a guy named Whittle2K, he's a very smart guy, and he said this himself, and I think it was very poignant. The Miami Dolphins, Josh respects. You notice that games when Josh kind of gets out of pocket, it's because he doesn't we don't know this, but this is the assertion that Josh doesn't respect the opponent, right? And it's entirely possible. And I don't mean he doesn't respect them in like a very, kind of crude, rude way. More so that he just knows that he can beat up on them. Or he feels that he can beat up on them. That's not the case with the Dolphins. So I think in Josh's sentiment with that, I think Josh stays within himself and knows that he can still come back. We've seen it. We saw in the 13-second game, Josh was the reason, minus the defense imploding. We've seen Josh come back in the Dallas game. We've seen Josh lead his team back in multiple occurrences over the course of his tenure with the Buffalo Bills. He can. He has to know that he has the ability. And I think what you're seeing, what he's been able to do over the the last 2 weeks in comparison to the first week, is he's understood that he has the options out there. He has the weapons. He's starting to trust who's there. You're seeing more of a trust with Dalton Kincaid, which is important. I think that's going to be important Sunday. I think it's possible, Roy. I think it's just there's a level of, as long as it doesn't get to the point where he's way behind, because if it's way behind, he's going to have to press. We know this. I don't think that's rocket science to make that assertion that Josh is going to have to push just because the Dolphins score at will, if they're scoring at will and they're ahead by a couple scores. He knows he has to make things happen. The defense is going to have to force the issue a little bit too and kind of press a little bit more. So I think it's going to be tough. I do like what the Dolphins are saying. I do have respect for Josh Allen, still hate him, but do respect him. Feeling is very mutual. Not that I hate Tua Tagovailoa. I respect Tua. I'm excited to see where this Dolphins relationship with the Bills go. Obviously, it's the competitiveness between the two is going to be a lot of fun for a long time. I'm hoping that Tua is able to stay healthy, but I think this matchup is going to be a lot of fun. There's a lot of very interesting matchups. The Bills running game versus the Dolphins defensive line. If the Bills can assert themselves and they can get their running game going, that's going to allow Josh to stay under center, to use the play action, which we've seen when he gets into that play action. There may not be anybody better in the NFL. He is deadly under play action. If you can get that happening, the Bills' offense is going to be very, very good. On top of that, the other part that's going to be very, very important, the Bills' secondary against the Miami Dolphins wide receivers and tight ends. You know damn well, we all know this. This matchup is going to be won and lost in those key matchups. It's going to be big. It's going to be big. I think Stephon Diggs is going to have his. Tyreek Hill is going to have his. Those two are just unstoppable forces. They are very, very good. You know how good they are all in all. The other thing is going to be big, and Josh Allen said this, Stephon Diggs said this today, is the fans. Being a home game, it's going to be 77 degrees. The weather is going to be unbelievable. My wife, myself, my in-laws are going to be at the game on Sunday. getting loud and dictating the offense is going to be big. A lot of what I said earlier is Tua's offense is timing based. A lot of it's communication. Getting loud and not allowing for Tua to communicate is going to be big too. If you can disrupt them in any which way possible and allowing their offense to have any type of issues, whether it's false starts or a bad handoff, like Sam was saying with Connor Williams, if there's any type of issues like that, that's what you need to do. The Bills need to get on top of any potential errors right out of the gate. Any type of extra possessions, any type of extra scoring, possibilities are going to be big time for this Buffalo Bills in a matchup like this against the Miami Dolphins, where we know more than likely every single possession is going to be not only at a premium, but imperative. So I think that's going to be something big there. And then I think the final thing we need to talk about is the coaching, right? And we'll finish off this right now. This can be the last topic right here, is the coaching. Mike McDaniel versus Sean McDermott, and then Ken Dorsey versus Vic Fangio. You're talking about two very rookie, and I won't say rookie Mike McDaniel, but two very, very, very young second-year offensive-minded coordinators against two very, very seasoned defensive-minded coaches, right? This is going to be a battle. It's going to be a chess battle as to who can come up with the best scheme to stop the other team's prolific offense and whose defense can make either a turnover or a game-changing play. We know both teams have very, very good defensive units. I think the Bills is a little bit better. Not saying anything's wrong against the Dolphins, but Dolphins have some very big injuries right now that they're working through. Not having Jalen Phillips is big. Not having Jalen Ramsey is very, very big. Xavier Howard is good, but we've seen Stephon Diggs has been able to exploit Xavier Howard as well as Jalen Ramsey. Javon Holland is unbelievable. I didn't mean to underplay him to Sam earlier. I'm just saying he's a young and up and coming in terms of the namesake, but he's a very talented safety. But I think the Bills in totality have a very well-rounded defensive unit. But I do agree with Ray Finkel. Nice name, by the way. I think it is going to come down to a potential last drive, last play, who has the ball. We saw that last time when the Bills had the last second run off the clock field goal by Tyler Bass. Points are either going to be at a premium or it's going to be a shootout. And I know that's a very low hanging fruit, but I think this matchup is going to be very, very interesting. I think it's going to be a game where you're going to have to, I think after the game, we're going to take a step back and say, wow, they really brought it all. And I think here's the other part about this. I think it's important is Josh Allen and Tua Tagovailoa. Josh Allen, and I'm not saying he has to prove himself, and I don't want to be like Chris Collinsworth when he said that now that Travis Kelce's not there, that Patrick Mahomes is going to prove to the world who he is. No, we know who Josh Allen is. Josh Allen is an unbelievable talent. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. But there is still a segment of the NFL that has this weird misconception about Josh Allen. They have this misconception that he can't get it done. There's a lot of people out there that throw haymakers at Josh for the mistakes he's made this season, that, he's still he hasn't played anybody worthwhile this season. And then there's Tua. Tua has been the guy, the talking point, the hot button topic for the NFL for the most part of 2 years. A guy that, one, hasn't been able to stay healthy, and that's not slander, it's just fact. And a guy that, people have kind of had something to say about. Now Tua's proving himself. So both guys have something to prove. Both guys have something to say. Both guys have something that they want to kind of change the narrative on. So this matchup has so many storylines, the biggest being the AFC East. This is huge in terms of seeding down the road. I think, I liked what Jeremy White on WGR said today. If we knew that we would lose today but beat the Dolphins in the playoffs, I think you'd take it. I'd still like to get this W. I think this matchup is going to be very, very close. If I had to put a prediction on it, I think my prediction, I think it's going to be 27-21 Buffalo. I think Buffalo is a very, very good defense. They're a sound defense. They've done very well against Miami in the past. I think the only time especially Mike McDaniel's offense. The only offense that they weren't able to was in that snow game, and that defense was, I mean, obliterated amongst measure. Same thing with the playoff game. But I think that the Bills have the ability to win this game. I think the Bills have the ability to stake the claim as the best team in the AFC East. I think they still are right now. I think it's just the Dolphins are a very, very talented, up-and-coming, potential new king of the hill. So the Bills are going to have to bring it on Sunday. Guys, this is big. It's a big-time matchup. Get ready for this matchup Sunday. I know I'm excited. I'm sure you're excited. If you are going, I will say this, get there early. We went through the home opener, and boy, oh boy, was traffic bad. Normally, we get there about 8:45. We get off at Southwestern, and we're able to drive all the way up to Abbott, and then you get the little bit of traffic from Abbott up to the stadium. Home opener, I got off at the 219. There was traffic all the way back to the exit at the Southwestern. Crazy traffic with the new stadium. New stadium being built. Excuse my Italian hands there. The RV lot is now being moved to where over closer to 7, where lot 5 used to be. Get there early. It's going to be crazy. It's a big time game, obviously. If you are going, get loud, get proud. Bills Mafia, we do need you. But I will say this, guys, before I close out on this show, I always end it like this. Guys, life is very, very tough. And what I will say, and I'm not going to get too deep into it, last Monday I found out that a coworker of mine, who's a family friend of ours, had a very massive cardiac event. He is in the hospital still to this day. He is still very much fighting. He's fighting for his life. He's hopefully getting back to health. We all praying for him immensely. But my point to this is I had talked to him just the day prior about, he's a musician and going to see his next show. And little did I know that any of this could potentially happen. Life in itself can change at the drop of a hat. It's very, very fickle. We don't know what's going to happen. I've talked about my grandfather, so I won't get into that. But my point is, love the people that's in your life. Tell them that you love them. Give somebody a call if you haven't talked to them in a while, but embrace the people around you. Be kind. Be nice to each other. It is very important. Life is too darn short. I mean, we are just a blip in the grand scheme of things. So needless to say, guys, this weekend is going to be amazing. Big game. Get ready for it. I am so pumped. I am so excited. Again, make sure you're signing up for the Cover One Pass. All of the great content that Cover One gives you. I appreciate you guys. Every single week, I'm going to have a different guest in relation to the opponent that we have. I'm very excited about this. Should be a lot of fun. But this has been Buffalo Late Night. I am your host, Thomas DeLoss. You can find me on Twitter at @TheThomasDeLoss. I truly do appreciate you every single week joining and hanging out with me. I had a lot of fun. This is a great chat, and you guys were fantastic. If I didn't catch all your stuff, I will try better and better. I'm not very good at paying attention to that, but if you do have something to say, you can do super chat. It'll pop right up, and I will absolutely see it. That's for sure. But again, guys, as always, truly do appreciate you guys here on Buffalo Late Night. We will see you here next week. Let's squish the fish. Let's get that W. Let's get back to number 1 in the AFC East. Let's get it. Let's go, Buffalo.
The Bills make me wanna.